World.
Our mission here at CNN and journalists, the news comes first. That's when your heart beats a little bit faster. More breaking news that we are following right now. You really work as hard as you can getting the facts. We're learning more about an alleged plot. It is critically important. To our viewers in the United States and around the world, welcome to the Situation Room. We have breaking news.
This is CNN. More people get their news from CNN than any other news source.
Happening now in the newsroom, a major moment in the fight against coronavirus. CDC advisors meeting at this hour to debate whether to recommend vaccines for kids as young as 6 months.
We've just been waiting for this moment to be able to give our children the same level of high protection that we have too.
How this is going to play out and when shots could start going into arms.
I'm using every lever available to me to bring down prices for the American people.
The White House projecting optimism despite soaring inflation, the impacts costs are having on Americans' wallets and some summer staples. Republican Senator John Cornyn booed at a GOP conference for his work on bipartisan gun legislation. His response and where those negotiations stand now. And a mega drought in the United States causing big problems for America's farmers.
Are we going to have water in 2-3 years out of our aquifer? Nobody can say that.
The devastating impact soaring temperatures are having on the industry and what that could mean for your food supply. Newsroom starts right now.
It is so good to have your company here this morning. It is Saturday, June 18th. I'm Christy Paul. Good morning.
Great to be with you, Christy. I'm Boris Sanchez. You were live in the CNN newsroom. And after months of waiting, the Moderna and Pfizer COVID-19 vaccines for the youngest Americans could finally get the green light as the CDC's vaccine advisors get ready to vote on authorization in just the next few hours. The White House, which has already pledged to have 10 million vaccine doses available, says that depending on today's vote, shots for kids under 5 could begin as soon as next week.
Now, this will mark a major milestone for millions of parents across the country who've waited pretty anxiously for their babies and toddlers to get protection. Roughly 17 million kids would become eligible for COVID-19 vaccines once they're approved for this age group. CNN's Miguel Marquez has been following all of this for us. Miguel, always good to see you. What are you learning this morning?
Yeah, well, they are just about to go into that final meeting. They met for several hours yesterday, that CDC advisory panel. They're going to meet for a couple hours today. And then around noon Eastern, maybe a little after, they will take that vote. And if, as expected, it will move forward, then it goes to the CDC director, who is expected to accede to their wishes and recommend that those shots be given to kids. Look, as you said, this is about 20 million kids. This is the last large tranche of Americans, the very youngest, the most vulnerable, to get these shots. 2 different shots, 2 different, slightly different regimes. The Moderna is a 2-shot regime. The Pfizer is a 3-shot regime. It's been studied broadly. It's been such a long time in coming, and there's been so much work done to ensure that these are safe for kids. There hasn't been a lot of concern about side effects. The level of protection, while it is much greater than they have without the vaccines, it's not as great as some adults are getting from these shots. Once it is approved, a lot of these shots are already being shipped to different cities. In New York, for instance, it will be Wednesday, the 22nd, when the city thinks they will be able to get those shots into arms. Back to you guys.
All right, Miguel Marquez, we appreciate it. Thank you so much. So let's talk about this with physician Buddy Creech. He's the physician and pediatric infectious disease professor at Vanderbilt University Medical Center. We appreciate you being here, Doctor. Thank you so much. I wanted to ask you first and foremost, because you are uniquely qualified, obviously, to speak about this. I know that your research is focused on developmental and evaluation of new vaccines and therapeutics, but how confident are you in these vaccines that have been crafted for this age group?
We've been working on these vaccines for the better part of 2 years now, having led the adult studies of both the Moderna and the Johnson & Johnson vaccines, and now leading these Moderna studies down to the age of 6 months. And I think what is fair to say is that we who are leading the trials are very comfortable with the safety that we're seeing in the clinical trials, the efficacy that we're seeing both in terms of the immune response and protection from severe disease. And now it's time for us to be able to put these vaccines into the hands of parents who have really wanted them for so long.
You mentioned the parents who've wanted them. The numbers might be surprising to some people. The latest polling from the Kaiser family shows only 18% of parents expect to get their child vaccinated. 38% say they're going to wait it out and see how it goes, and 27% say they would not vaccinate their child at all. With that said, what factors would you be considering? What would you be ruminating over if you're trying to determine whether this vaccine is right for you and your family?
Well, I think parents want to do what's best for the health of their child. And for some, they still have questions. And that's where their pediatrician, their local health provider, could be very helpful in addressing those questions head on. Sometimes it's about safety. Sometimes it's about risk and how much risk we're actually seeing in children right now. I think the biggest factor going into decisions for parents right now is that it's a misnomer that children aren't infected with this virus. We can look around and see children infected a lot, and we see various types of infections that are coming to our children's hospitals right now. So for those high-risk children with underlying medical conditions, for those who live in families with family members who have high-risk conditions, I think the results from the studies and the results from the work that we've put in over the last couple of years shows that these vaccines are going to be safe and effective at preventing the bad outcomes that we so want to avoid with COVID.
And it's interesting you mentioned that because as far as I can tell, there were about 442 children under the age of 5 who died from COVID out of more than 1 million people that died here in the U.S. But the frequency of hospitalization of this age group of children during Omicron was frightening to people. How concerned are you about the newer variants out there, specifically with this age group, and how effective might this vaccine be at curbing that?
As pediatricians, we dread the winter and early spring every year because we know our hospitals are going to be filled with healthy as well as at-risk children who have complications from what should be common colds. While we see this virus changing into more of a common cold for those of us who are adults, we are seeing complications in children that make us want to act, not only in those who have underlying medical conditions like heart disease or lung disease or who are born prematurely, but also those healthy children that we don't understand why they have bad outcomes from this virus. I think that's why parents are going to want to get questions answered, to be able to get their children vaccinated and take advantage of this tool that's our next step in hopefully seeing this pandemic come to a real end.
All right. Dr. Buddy Creech, your expertise is so appreciated here. Thank you for taking time for us this morning.
Thanks so much.
Of course.
So Friday marked the end of a rocky week for Wall Street. The downturn came Wednesday after the Federal Reserve raised rates by 75 basis points. That's the largest hike in 28 years. Now, those efforts to tame inflation have sparked fears that the United States is approaching a recession. The Dow closed down on Friday. The S&P closed marginally higher, but still wound up with its worst week since 2020. On the brighter side, we also learned that wages in the United States are climbing at their fastest rate since the 1980s. But inflation has spiked so fast that workers have actually been handed a pay cut.
And Jasmine Wright is live in Washington. Jasmine, we know the White House is trying to strike this optimistic tone, but there are a lot of people who are really struggling right now. How does the president make that optimism effective?
Yeah, well, the president said yesterday that his administration is using every lever to try to bring those prices down. But he also projected that optimism by saying that he believed that the U.S. is the best positioned nation in the world to deal with the global inflation that we're seeing. But, Chrissy, the truth is that that optimism doesn't exactly jive with what Americans are feeling when they feel that pinch at the gas pump, at the grocery store, really when they're paying those everyday prices. So that is going to be a major hurdle hurdle for this administration to overcome, really trying to empathize with Americans, that they understand how they're feeling, but also projecting that they are actually in a good place, especially as we get closer and closer to the midterms. Now, Biden tried to utilize that messaging when he sat down for a rare interview this week with the Associated Press, 30 minutes, and he said that, frankly, he understands that Americans are down. But he also was on the defensive a bit when he rejected the notion that his administration has negatively impacted inflation. He said, and I want to read you this quote, he said, "You could argue whether it had a marginal minor impact on inflation. I don't think it did, and most economists don't think it did, but the idea that it caused inflation is bizarre." Now, he's talking about that $1.9 trillion rescue plan passed in 2021. Christy.
Jasmine, President Biden is spending the weekend in Delaware. He was out for a bike ride. He had a tumble, didn't he? Any word on how he's doing?
Yeah, the president took a spill there. You can see it on the screen. The pool press traveling with him kind of caught it, and you see him getting pulled up by the Secret Service. Now, right after that, he said that he was doing okay. He said to the press that he basically caught his foot on the bike. Now, we've asked for more details about how the president's doing, but after that, you can see that he addressed the crowd, really talking about his job, saying, you know, that being the president is like any other job. Some days it's easy, some days it's hard.
All right, just glad he's okay. Jasmine Wright, thank you so much. So still to come, the January 6th committee is turning their attention to how former President Trump and his allies pressured state officials to overturn 2020 election results. We have a look ahead at the witnesses that are slated for this week.
And a building collapse in Philadelphia has claimed the life of a veteran firefighter. The latest on this investigation after a quick break.
Africa Avant-Garde in association with Access Bank. More than banking.
We need to start developing more writers. As a producer, I'm always on the lookout for new voices, new writers, because those are the foundations of good storytelling.
The best advice I've ever received is to never stop writing, because once you start practicing the thing that you want to get good at, you start having all those inflicting thoughts of, am I good enough?
To find your voice as a filmmaker or to tell stories that have deep impact, they have to be stories that affect you yourself. If it doesn't affect you, you can't translate that into a story. Whatever you write will be superficial. So first, if you're going to tell a story that is honest, it has to be honest to you first.
We've missed the globe-trotting and adventures, and we're longing to get out and go.
This is living.
Uncovering the city's DNA.
Look at that.
Meeting people who will share its secrets.
It's going to be very cold.
And making discoveries that wow.
We're not doing that again.
It's a world of wonder.
Gorgeous.
Now, go and see it. Tonight on CNN, in association with Turkish Airlines.
I believe we have an opportunity to move towards hope because we are learning more about this criminal enterprise. My name is Lisa C. Williams. I'm a philanthropist and an advocate for survivors of human trafficking. When I look back over 22 years of when I first started working in this space, I was simply trying to find safe shelter for girls who were 10 and 11 years old who were being bought and sold on our streets. One of the things that I remember very vividly, it was a turning point in our fight for Rachel's Law, is the CNN special, Children for Sale. It took something like that documentary that was hosted by Jada Pinkett Smith to wake up people and for them to want to look at it and understand what we were saying to them. And that just gave us momentum. And we took that film and we took it all over Georgia, and we galvanized people around a movement that we call the I Am Rachel movement to tell them about the safe harbor law that we were trying to get passed. And 83% of Georgians said, we agree. that children are children and not the criminals.
In 1917, Cartier came upon his breakthrough, revolutionary, by far the most famous design, the Cartier tank. Now, the inspiration for this design was, as the name suggests, a British Mark IV tank.
For much of its history, it was an extremely exclusive watch. The tank was made in very small numbers until the mid-1960s. Cartier tanks from before the 1960s especially are tremendously collectible. It's an absolutely iconic design.
This became an elegant symbol, a very desirable watch. Through the ages, we have Jackie Onassis wearing this watch. We have Truman Capote, Andy Warhol, Duke Ellington, Jeff Goldblum. Team Tank is a stylish team indeed. It's a rectangular case and it has these very identifiable vertical sidebars called brancards. You can recognize a tank across the room.
A Philadelphia firefighter is dead after a building collapse early this morning during an intense fire. The mayor tweeting out in part, quote, "Grieving with members of the Philadelphia Fire Department and all of Philadelphia who lost one of our own in the line of duty today." The name of the firefighter has not yet been released because the family has yet to be notified. Officials, though, say the firefighter was a 27-year veteran of the department.
People are just starting to decompress because we just finished up pulling our brother out of this place and our brothers out of this place. And you know, it's going to be a rough few weeks coming up.
Yeah, they're family together there. 4 other firefighters and 1 license and inspection inspector that were rescued were taken to Temple University Hospital. They're in stable condition, we're told. Officials described this collapse as a, quote, lean to slash pancake situation, which means part of the building didn't fall flat on surfaces, and that created void spaces. Fire marshals are still investigating the cause of that fire, though.
Sometimes my job is pretty simple. Sometimes my job is as simple as saying no.
You hear there the lead Republican negotiator on the bipartisan gun safety package, Senator John Cornyn, being booed at a Texas GOP convention yesterday as he discussed what that bill includes.
Serious doubts are now emerging about the Senate's ability to pass gun control legislation. A Republican source telling CNN that it's going to be a long time before the text of that bill is ready, despite optimism from some Democrats who believe that these sides have made progress. Let's take you to Capitol Hill now and CNN's Daniela Diaz. So Daniela, what is the holdup on getting this bill to a vote?
Boris, right now negotiators are trying to finalize details on 2 major sticking points. Remember, they had this framework, but now they're trying to write the legislation, which is why they're stuck on these details. One of them being the so-called boyfriend loophole. There's a disagreement about how to define what a boyfriend is. Of course, this comes with a law that prohibits people from owning or purchasing guns because of a domestic violence conviction. Currently, that ban only applies to someone who is a spouse or cohabitates with someone or has a child with someone. So that is why negotiators are trying to figure out what a boyfriend means. That is one detail they're stuck on. Another detail they're stuck on is red flag laws. There's currently funding that they want to include in this legislation that would incentivize states to implement red flag laws. However, one key negotiator, John Cornyn, a Republican from Texas, he wants some of that funding to be able to go to creating, quote, crisis intervention programs. So that is one, those 2 sticking points being the details that they're stuck on right now. Boris.
So Daniela, what happens at this point? What happens next?
Well, Christy, right now, the senators recognize that they have momentum on this issue, which is why they're working around the clock to try to finalize these details and get a bill on the floor by next week before they go to a summer recess for 2 weeks. That is why they're trying really hard to finalize these points, and it remains to be seen whether they'll be able to do it, but we know that they're planning to work over the weekend, and they'll be back in person next week to continue these negotiations. Christy, Boris?
Daniela Diaz, live from Capitol Hill. Thank you so much. Let's get some perspective now with Police Chief Dwight Henninger. He's not only the police chief of Vail, Colorado, but also the head of the International Association of Chiefs of Police, a group that recently paired with the Fraternal Order of Police in a letter urging Congress to act on gun safety legislation. Chief, we appreciate you being with us this Saturday morning. Why is it so important in your eyes for Congress to get something done now?
Well, Boris, first I'd like to say my heart goes out to the folks in Philadelphia and the Philadelphia Fire Department and the lost firefighter and their family. But from our perspective at the IACP, some progress is so important. There hasn't been significant gun legislation around gun violence in the last 30 years. So we're excited that there's the potential this time around. Our members and from big cities and small cities are concerned about the level of violence on a daily basis. We're seeing 12 people die a day from gun violence, whether from gang-related shootings or even suicide. It's just something that's got to be done.
As we just heard from Daniela, the sticking points include the incentives for red flag laws, closing that boyfriend loophole, defining what a boyfriend is. Some ideas that have been excluded, though, include an assault weapons ban or raising the minimum age to buy one of those weapons. I'm wondering what reforms you think would be most impactful, what you think of what's in the bill currently.
Well, this problem is not going to be solved by one or two measures. It's going to take a number of bites at the apple to fix this problem. But anything is a good start. The boyfriend loophole doesn't make a lot of sense to me. If you're convicted of assaulting your girlfriend or your spouse, it's the same situation. Why would one person be allowed to still purchase a weapon, and why would another not be able to purchase a firearm? So it doesn't make any sense to me on that level. The other areas around the background checks are very important. We've made that system better, but there's still areas that need to be worked on along those lines.
I think the argument from people that are for that closing of the boyfriend loophole is that people that are involved in domestic violence disputes or that have been convicted of that kind of abuse have a higher tendency toward violence. And so by eliminating their access to weapons, at least in theory, or making it harder for them to get weapons, there likely would be less likelihood of some kind of follow-up toward that violence. But you say you don't believe that that's the case?
No, I do believe that the level of violence that we're seeing, in domestic violence situations is definitely concerning, and that's the whole purpose behind the background check system, is that when somebody goes to buy a firearm, they go through the background check through the FBI, and they know whether or not they have had a prior conviction for domestic violence or a mental health issue, and so that's really important before we give somebody a gun. In the past, there was a cooling off period because it took just time to do those background checks. Now they're instantaneous, and so there's no opportunity to let people cool down in a heat of a moment.
Chief, I'm wondering what you say to prominent lawmakers like Senator Ted Cruz of Texas. He argues that gun laws are not effective. He also says that there's an inalienable right enshrined in the Constitution allowing Americans to have weapons. What's your response to that argument?
Well, I don't want to take on any specific senator, but from the ISP's perspective, any type of law needs to be recognized that there are give and take on that. Even the Second Amendment is not absolute, and the level of gun violence in our country is really problematic. We're talking about 40,000 deaths a year. There needs to be some action taken to start closing some of those problems that are allowing access to firearms to people who are in crisis or having a really bad day. So we need to really take some, really thoughtful moves, recognizing that it takes a lot to solve this problem, but we also need in each of our decisions to be concerned about the Second Amendment because we all want to support lawful gun owners.
You have referred to the gun violence epidemic as an international embarrassment. I'm wondering if lawmakers can't reach a deal on this, what's at stake in your mind?
Well, as the president of the International Association of Chiefs of Police, we're in 168 countries. We have members there. And in my travels this past year, I've been asked on many occasions by other police leaders, with a country as great as the United States, why can't you fix this problem? And I'm at a loss, to be honest with you. It seems like such a partisan issue, but it really is about the safety of our streets. It's the most challenging thing affecting our way of life right now, and we need to take some action. I'm hopeful that in the near future, I'll be able to tell my peers around the world that we are making some progress like we've seen in Canada, the United Kingdom, New Zealand, and Australia.
I want to share with our viewers that you actually have personal experience with gun violence in your own life. What would you say to the victims and families of victims who might be frustrated watching a lack of action so far from lawmakers at the national level?
Yeah, as a young police officer, I was shot and my partner was killed on duty. And I feel for the way the victims of gun violence, or even victims of families who have had a suicide in their family, the thoughts and prayers messages are just not cutting it any longer. Congress needs to take some action. And many states have taken good steps to be more effective in limiting gun violence, but guns are so easily transported across state lines, it needs to be a national legislation.
Chief Dwight Henninger, we have to leave the conversation there. We appreciate your service and your time joining us this morning.
It's an honor to be a police officer. Thanks for having me on.
Of course, thank you.
Thank you to him and to all the fellow officers out there. All right, former President Trump lashing out against the January 6th committee in front of a conservative crowd in Nashville. What he's saying about his vice president next.
Well, I want to thank you. What a beautiful turnout.
China, no wallet, no problem. Here, using an app on your phone to make purchases is an everyday practice. The industry so far has been dominated by private companies. That could soon change. China's new digital currency, known as the e-yuan, made headlines at the Winter Olympic Games, a centralized virtual form of currency that can be used just like money across the country.
I think the rollout at the Beijing Olympics is designed in some ways to show the flag internationally.
Other parts of the world have similar ambitions. The European Central Bank announced plans to create a digital version of the euro, aiming to achieve this milestone by 2026. The United States, the world's biggest economy, is currently in the research phase of its own digital dollar, but will not yet proceed, citing concerns around financial stability and privacy.
I want to go now to an incredible story of survival. Could all this spending lead to a bigger economic crisis? Or would you do it all again in terms of being a nurse?
I want to help people more than I ever have.
Aaron Burnett out front on CNN. On the next Living Golf, discover the history of the sport in Sweden. How do they keep producing some of the world's best golfers? Hear from rising stars.
I think it's just more fun when a Swede wins.
Then, visit the region's flagship event, the Scandinavian Mixed, and sit down with Europe's next Ryder Cup captain, Henrik Stenson.
This is where it all started for me.
Living Golf, tonight on CNN, in association with Gulf Saudi.
I'm Salma Abdulaziz in Kyiv, and this is CNN.
COVID was something from the movies. Asia was much more draconian with it. And so, you know, we hardly did any flying for 2 years. So imagine an airline with 21,000 staff, 250 aircraft at that time. It's a nightmare scenario, but I think the worst is over now, and it's given us a chance to do things we probably couldn't have done before. COVID, one of the benefits was enabling me to pivot the ship and start looking at our data and our brand in a different way. The internet has made pricing transparent, so anyone is not going to come directly to AirAsia. They're going to search around, Google Travel, whatever. So I said to our team, let's be a travel agent. So separated the company, created the super app, and I'm aiming to be Expedia.
I'm Dr. Sanjay Gupta in New York, and this is CNN.
The January 6th committee detailed this week how Donald Trump tried to pressure then Vice President Mike Pence to help him overturn the 2020 election. According to witness testimony, Trump was told repeatedly that his scheme was illegal and that the Supreme Court would shoot it down. But he tried to do it anyway.
Now, when the vice president refused, Trump went on the attack, tweeting, quote, "Mike Pence didn't have the courage to do what should have been done to protect our country and our Constitution, giving states a chance to certify a corrected set of facts, not the fraudulent or inaccurate ones which they were asked to previously certify. USA demands the truth," unquote. Now, critics say those words were used to whip up rioters at the Capitol.
Just heard that Mike Pence is not going to reject any fraudulent elector votes. That's right. You've heard it here first. Mike Pence has betrayed the United States of America.
It was clear that it was escalating and escalating quickly. So then when that tweet, the Mike Pence tweet, was sent out, I remember us saying that that was the last thing that needed to be tweeted at that moment. The situation was already bad, and so it felt like he was pouring gasoline on the fire by tweeting that.
Let's go to CNN reporter Marshall Cohen now. Marshall, how significant was this testimony in the latest hearing?
Good morning, Boris and Christy. Very significant. I mean, you heard right there from a White House official that it was like pouring gasoline on the fire. That's not a Democratic critic. That's not some, anti-Trump partisan. That's the own Trump White House. And we heard a lot on Thursday from other White House aides from Mike Pence's staff about the real dangers that he faced on January 6th. Remember, this was a violent assault on the Capitol. People ran for their lives, congressional staffers, lawmakers, the Vice President Mike Pence and his team. And we heard a lot from his team, not only about the dangers, but also about the scheme, what Trump wanted Pence to do. This was a plan cooked up between Donald Trump and a right-wing attorney, John Eastman, who was advising Trump on a frankly ridiculous legal theory that somehow, some way, Mike Pence could abuse his powers overseeing the joint session of Congress on January 6th to throw out some of Joe Biden's electoral votes and basically crown Trump with a second term. It's a preposterous theory. The testimony revealed that Eastman even knew that it would require a violation of federal law and that Pence directly advised Trump that it would be unconstitutional. But yet, according to the testimony, Trump pushed ahead anyway, up through the morning of January 6th, trying to get Pence to do it. Take a listen to what Pence's top legal advisor, Greg Jacobs, said would have happened to this country if Pence had caved and followed along with Trump's plan.
A constitutional jump ball situation, political chaos in Washington, lawsuits, and who knows what happening in the streets. And you would have had the Vice President of the United States having declared that the outcomes of these state elections were incorrect. We would have established a situation where a vice president would have asserted that one person could have the authority to determine the outcome of an election, which is antithetical to everything in our democracy. It's antithetical to the rule of law.
Yeah, so it's not pretty what would have happened. Thank goodness it didn't. So that was last week, a massive pressure campaign against Mike Pence. What the committee is going to feature on Tuesday, its next hearing, is the pressure campaign in a specific state, Georgia, where, as we know, Donald Trump tried to pressure and cajole the election officials in that state to overturn the election, to find enough votes to give him a victory. They refused to do it. We're going to hear from the Secretary of State, Brad Raffensperger, a Republican who, by the way, just beat a Trump-backed opponent in his GOP primary.
Yeah, good to point out. Marshall Cohen, thank you so much. We appreciate that. Now, former President Trump, as you can imagine, has a lot to say about the January 6th committee.
Yeah, he was addressing a crowd at the Faith and Freedom Coalition's annual Road to Majority conference. Trump blasted the House panel, doubling down on his criticism of Vice President Pence's actions on January 6th. Let's take you to the conference now with CNN's Kristen Holmes. She joins us now live from Nashville. Kristen, the former president is on tour, essentially, airing his grievances.
Good morning, Boris and Christy. Well, yesterday it certainly seemed like that. This was his first opportunity to really address the hearings, other than on his social media website, as well as in a lengthy 12-page statement. And he ran with that opportunity. He repeated his lies about the 2020 election. He attacked the committee. He accused the committee of editing deceptively videos to make him look bad. And I will note that the chairman of the committee has said that they will eventually release the full transcripts. But perhaps most striking was that attack on Mike Pence, his former vice president, a man who served under him for 4 years, who just the day before, as Marshall said, the committee had laid out the real danger that Pence was in on January 6th. Take a listen to just some of what Trump said about Pence.
I never called Mike Pence a wimp. I never called him a wimp. Mike Pence had a chance to be great. He had a chance to be, frankly, historic. But just like Bill Barr and the rest of these weak people, Mike, and I say it sadly because I like him, but Mike did not have the courage to act.
So, Boris and Christy, one thing I want to point out here is about this crowd. Yes, there are a lot of Trump supporters in the crowd, but this is a very Mike Pence-friendly crowd. It's a religious conservative event, an event that Pence has spoken at for years. And yet still did not stop Trump from completely mocking the former vice president, sometimes to just tepid applause.
Kristen Holmes, live from Nashville. Thank you so much, Kristen. So more than 25 million people are under heat alerts, and some folks are going to feel triple-digit temperatures along with potentially some new records. Your weather forecast is next.
My name's Jim Brailsford, and I lead the Industry and Solutions Marketing team for Kinaxis. It's absolutely key that businesses incorporate sustainability into their business models. Firstly, you have got the corporate objective and being a good global citizen. You've also got the need to be reflecting that to your public, to your consumers, that show that you are actually being environmentally conscious. And also, as supply chains are more mature and are considering all of these things in a holistic way, it develops a sort of a steadiness to their operation. Supply chain sustainability will become a qualifier. It will not necessarily be the winner, but it'll become a qualifier enabling you to participate in the competition.
Monday, let's lift every voice. A CNN concert event. The Roots, Yolanda Adams, Earth, Wind & Fire, Lucky Day, Mary Mary, Killer Mike, Anthony Hamilton, Billy Porter, Debbie Allen Dance Academy, Michelle Williams, and so much more. Juneteenth, a global celebration for freedom. Live from the Hollywood Bowl, only on CNN.
We're here now at the home of one of the FSB team, and my name's Clarissa Ward. I work for CNN. Was it your team that poisoned Navalny?
It's just been a chaotic scene here. People are so exhausted. I'm just gonna help her carry this bag. We were just in the hospital. It was shocking. Why do you think India has been hit so badly? Scores of Taliban fighters, and just behind us, the U.S. Embassy.
Why does a small group of women asking for their right to be educated threaten you so much?
Raise your hand if you love school.
I'm the one who has to look them in the eye. Can I have your word? These people are depending on you.
You can hear gunshots every couple minutes. And now they're pressing in. They want desperately to tell their story.
The busy summer travel season is off to a rocky start with thousands of flight cancellations and sky-high ticket prices. Airlines canceled nearly 1,500 flights yesterday. Already, over 600 today are canceled.
And sources tell CNN Transportation Secretary Pete Buttigieg has urged airline executives to review their flight plans ahead of the 4th of July holiday to try to soften the impact of flight summer cancellations. Now, this comes after more than 2,700 flights were canceled over Memorial Day weekend. Delta, by the way, has led the way, saying that it would cancel about 100 flights a day to minimize disruptions. But Delta's pilots union published a letter saying they're being overworked and they're frustrated.
Our issue really began a while ago during COVID, and we've been making it very clear to Delta management for quite a while that we are not staffed appropriately for this summer flying. We don't have enough pilots, and the company is scheduling more flights than they can fly. We've been very vocal about it for the last few months. We've been picketing at Delta bases and hubs throughout the system to send that message that our pilots are tired and we're frustrated, we're fatigued.
Now, in response, Delta issued a statement reading in part, quote, "We continuously evaluate our staffing models and plan ahead so that we can recover quickly when unforeseen circumstances arise," unquote. And if you're not getting away, you're probably going to want to stay in the house because, oh my gosh, this heat, it's stifling, it's downright dangerous. I mean, it is baking parts of the U.S. this weekend. We know there are more than 25 million of you in more than a dozen states that are under some sort of heat alerts already.
It is widespread. Let's take you to the CNN Weather Center where we find Allison Chinchar tracking the latest forecast. And Allison, a lot of places could potentially see record-breaking temperatures.
Right, I think that's kind of the point. Look, we get it. It's summer. It's supposed to be hot. But when you're talking about some of these areas reaching record levels and then doing it multiple days and then one heat wave after the next, week after week, it takes its toll. And in some of these states, they're still dealing with hundreds of thousands of power outages with no access to air conditioning. So in all the areas you see here in orange, that's where we've got the heat advisories. Pink is excessive heat warnings and that dark red color excessive heat watches that are likely to transition into warnings in the coming days as those temperatures begin to rise. Take a look, for example, Little Rock. High temperature today of 94, but when you factor in that humidity, now you're looking at a heat index around 105. New Orleans also looking at a high temperature right around 95, but that feels like temperature jumps up to 106. Now, as more of that heat begins to spread, that's when you're going to start to see an increase in the number of millions of people that are under those heat advisories, because by next week, pretty much most of the country is dealing with above average temperatures. All of these dots here represent a location that has the potential to break a record high temperature, whether that's today or sometime over the next several days. And in some cities, Boris and Christy, they could be looking at multiple days of records in a row.
That is tough. Allison Shinshar, thank you so much. By the way, scientists are saying a mega drought across the western U.S. could get even worse.
Yeah, and making matters more difficult for farmers. Some of them have already had their water sources cut off. CNN's Mike Valerio has their story.
As scarce water showers shades of gold across browning fields, the predictions are dire.
It's scary to think that we may not be able to do this because we don't have the water to do it.
Richard Bianchi is a fourth-generation farmer here in Hollister, California. His fields, farm, and family are now facing the U.S. megadrought, which scientists say is the worst western dry spell in 1,200 years. More than 90% of the West is in a drought, and Bianchi's most reliable water source is now shut off.
So to be clear, Richard, you're getting no water, 0% from your best water source.
Correct.
What are the biggest impacts? How would you explain that to somebody outside of Hollister?
It's limiting the amount of ground that we can farm. It's limiting the amount of the intensity that we can farm.
Bianchi has no choice but to pump lower quality groundwater into his fields, and he's not sure how long that'll last. Less water limits the crops he can grow, and he tells us that reduces our choices at the grocery store. Economists say less supply pushes prices even higher, more pain on top of sky-high inflation. The drought leaves fields fallow, and scientists say fuels historic infernos.
Climate science connects deepening droughts with dried up earth all around us to longer, more severe wildfire seasons. In fact, the fires in New Mexico started much earlier this year than in years past, and right now, it's only spring.
Federal officials tell us the nightmare is already here. Up to 3/4 of Northern California's farming fields could stay fallow, growing nothing this summer. For Bianchi, whether there's a future for a fifth generation of his family's farmers is now in doubt.
Are we going to have water in 2-3 years out of our aquifer? Nobody could say that.
In Hollister, California, I'm Mike Valerio reporting.
Mike, thanks for that report. It sounds like a storyline straight out of WrestleMania. The head of WWE is on the ropes after a SmackDown involving hush money and a sex scandal. Some details straight ahead.
I've been traveling through memories of my life, learning something new each and every time. On my way, on my way.
Back in person, the 2022 Afreximbank annual meetings will bring together high-profile continental and global leaders to harness and leverage Africa's incredible potential. Register now.
Trends, tech, new, Marketplace Asia.
Travel and tourism in Asia. How airlines new and old are navigating a post-pandemic world.
Marketplace Asia, today on CNN.
Populations of wildlife need genetic diversity to be resilient, to be able to survive. You get that resilience and you get that genetic diversity by having mixing. You know, you have mixing of jaguars from the northern part of Belize with jaguars of the southern part of Belize. And that means that wildlife need to find their way through that tiny sliver of forest. Imagine you're getting squeezed on both sides, right? Your forest cover is going. In this particular case, it's mostly due to large-scale mechanized monocrop or agriculture that's taking place. We are here at the Cox Lagoon wetland, which is actually a very critical and important part of a 30,000-acre parcel of land that we have just purchased to protect in perpetuity for the people and government of Belize. Hope is the last thing to keep you standing. You know, when there is no hope, then that's it.
Connect the world with Becky Anderson.
It all starts here. Changing, fighting, creating, connecting. That's why we're here. We live here, we work here, we're from here, and we'll go wherever the story takes us.
I'm Becky Anderson in Tehran.
We are in Jerusalem. Real news that shapes our world. Exploring not just what's going on, but why.
I just want to press you on one further point.
Getting perspective on this region from this region. Places that many of us know, but few of us get to see. Observing countries on the move, still rooted in tradition. It all starts here, and that's why we're here, bringing you the world from our Middle Eastern hub.
Connect the world with Becky Anderson, Monday through Friday on CNN.
I'm Bill Weir in Greenland, and this is CNN.
Now to a real-life scandal rocking the world of wrestling. World Wrestling Entertainment boss Vince McMahon is stepping back as CEO and chairman.
Yeah, the company's board is investigating a Wall Street Journal report that McMahon paid millions of dollars in hush money payments to a former employee about an alleged affair. McMahon's had control of that company since 1982. He's turning it into a publicly traded company. Global wrestling powerhouse, media conglomerate, you name it. Well, as CNN's Jason Carroll reports, McMahon's daughter is going to step in as the company's interim CEO now.
Please welcome the chairman of WWE, Vince McMahon!
Larger than life, Vince McMahon, more famous than some of the wrestling stars he helped create.
He's the guy. I mean, it's the WWE is Vince McMahon. You can't separate them.
WrestleMania! Now McMahon forced to step back from his role as chairman and CEO of World Wrestling Entertainment, WWE, while the company's board investigates misconduct claims against him. His daughter, his interim replacement. The Wall Street Journal reporting McMahon paid a former employee who he allegedly had an affair with $3 million to keep her quiet. According to the Journal, the separation agreement prevents her from discussing her relationship. The investigation also looking at other non-disclosure agreements involving misconduct claims against McMahon and another executive.
What would have been considered boys will be boys, which wrestling was built on for decades and decades and decades. And by today's standards, it's not quite as much.
I have pledged my complete cooperation to the investigation by the special committee, McMahon said in a statement, and I have also pledged to accept the findings and outcome of the investigation, whatever they are. Wrestling journalist Dave Meltzer says it is tough to predict the fallout from the allegations.
Their big defense is that any money that he paid, any hush money that he paid, was his own money and it was not company money. And I think that's the key to the investigation.
Over decades, McMahon turned the WWE into a billion-dollar entertainment juggernaut, including deals with Fox and NBC. He will still be in charge of creative content.